There's a moment, quiet and unassuming, when we stop making excuses for what we went through and finally call it what it was. That moment is the beginning of everything. We may not know it then, but when we dare to name the hurt, when we say this was not love or I was not treated with respect, we are lighting the first tiny flame in the long, winding process of healing. It's not a scream. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a whisper in the dark, a shaky breath between tears, a journal entry at 2 a.m. Toxic relationships are skilled illusionists. They twist the narrative. They whisper, maybe it's you. They gaslight, minimize, deflect. And over time, the harm becomes familiar. Not comfortable, but familiar. We adapt. We rationalize. We shrink. We lose the words for what we're experiencing because we've been taught, sometimes overtly, sometimes through silence, that it's not okay to call it abuse unless it leaves a bruise, that unless we're completely shattered, we should be fine. But the truth is, emotional wounds do count. Psychological manipulation does damage us, and betrayal by someone who claimed to love us, that's a wound that cuts deep. Naming the hurt is not about blame. It's about truth-telling. And truth-telling is a radical act of self-respect. It says, I believe my own experience. It says, I trust my gut even when it was ignored or dismissed. It says, my pain is real and I'm allowed to feel it. This act, as simple as it may sound, is one of the most powerful steps we can take after leaving something that was slowly eroding our sense of self. But here's what makes it hard. Many of us were raised to keep the peace, to not rock the boat. We're taught that moving on means being silent, that being strong means pretending it didn't affect us, that forgiveness is synonymous with forgetting. So when we speak the truth out loud, when we say that relationship hurt me or I lost pieces of myself there, we feel guilty. We wonder if we're being too dramatic. We question if we're allowed to take up space with our pain. And that's the trauma talking. Healing doesn't begin with clarity. It begins with confusion, with fog, with 1,000 mixed emotions. You can miss someone and still know they were harmful. You can feel relief and still mourn what you hoped it could have been. These contradictions don't make you weak, they make you human. Naming the hurt invites all of those truths to the table. It says, there is room here for every part of me, even the confused, even the ashamed, even the angry. One of the bravest things we can do is stop downplaying what we went through. We don't need permission to grieve. We don't need a checklist of proof. If your heart broke, it broke. If your sense of safety was compromised, that matters. If you learn to doubt your instincts because someone dismissed your emotions over and over again, then that's a real wound. And we honor our healing by calling those wounds by their real names. There's no shortcut through this process, no tidy way to stitch up something that was slowly torn open. But in naming what happened, we reclaim language that was once used against us. We take back the words. We say, this is what it was, and I will not pretend otherwise. In that moment, healing becomes more than an abstract hope. It becomes a path we can actually walk. So if you're standing in the aftermath, wondering where to begin, start there. Name the hurt, even if your voice shakes. Even if your words come out messy, you deserve to tell the truth about your own story. And the truth, as painful as it may be, is also what sets you free. After we name the hurt, something sacred begins to stir inside of us, an almost forgotten truth that whispers, you were never the problem. But that whisper, it has to compete with the echoes of every time we were made to feel too sensitive, too needy, too much, or somehow not enough. That's the legacy of a toxic relationship. It rearranges your sense of self-worth until you're not sure where you end and their opinion of you begin. Reclaiming your worth is about untangling that mess. It's about coming back to yourself piece by piece and saying, I still belong to me. Worthiness is not a feeling we just wake up with one day. It's a quiet commitment we make to ourselves. It's the decision to stop basing our value on how lovable we were to someone who couldn't love us well. Because when we tie our worth to someone else's brokenness, we end up shrinking, apologizing for our needs, and convincing ourselves that love is something we must earn. That is not love. That's survival. And surviving isn't the same as being cherished. One of the hardest things to accept is this: someone else's inability to love you does not mean you are unlovable. Let me say that again for the part of you that still doubts it. Someone else's inability to love you does not mean you are unlovable. It means they were not capable of meeting you where you deserved to be met. That is about them, not you. Your worth was never up for debate, even on the days you forgot it, even when you settled for crumbs. Reclaiming your worth means beginning again with tenderness. You don't have to rebuild yourself from scratch. You're not broken. You're rediscovering, you're remembering. Maybe for the first time in a long time, you're learning to speak to yourself without cruelty. You're setting boundaries that honor your peace instead of betraying it. You're learning that silence doesn't always mean safety, and that using your voice, even shakily, is an act of reclamation. It also means grieving who you had to become just to survive that relationship. Maybe you learned to walk on eggshells. Maybe you stopped asking for what you needed. Maybe you dimmed your light so you wouldn't outshine their insecurity. That wasn't weakness, that was strategy, that was survival. But you don't have to live in survival mode anymore. You get to evolve past it now. You get to be safe in your own skin again. And let's be honest, this part of healing isn't glamorous. It's not always affirmations and bubble baths. Sometimes it's looking in the mirror and realizing you don't recognize the person staring back. Sometimes it's sitting with anger at yourself for staying too long, for not seeing it sooner, and then forgiving yourself anyway, because you did the best you could with what you knew at the time, and now you know better. That's growth. That's reclaiming. Reclaiming your worth means letting go of the belief that love should hurt, that connection requires self-abandonment, that you must perform to be chosen. You don't have to shape-shift anymore. You don't have to carry someone else's wounds like they're your responsibility to heal. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs. You're allowed to be whole without asking anyone for permission. So if you're wondering how to move forward, start here. Speak kindly to yourself. Say your name like it matters. Return to your body like it's sacred. Walk into the world like your presence isn't just tolerated, it's necessary, because it is. You are not the damage someone caused. You are the resilience that bloomed in its aftermath. You are worthy. You always were. We don't talk enough about the grief that follows a toxic relationship. People expect relief. And yes, relief comes, but not always first. Not always loud enough to drown out the ache. Because even when we walk away from something harmful, we're still walking away from something we hoped could be different. And that kind of grief, it's messy. It doesn't follow stages. It doesn't care if the person we left was cruel, manipulative, or unavailable. The grief still finds us in quiet moments, in dreams, in songs we used to love. Grief after toxicity is complicated. You're not just grieving the person. You're grieving the version of you that stayed, the energy you poured into fixing what was never yours to fix, the years you spent hoping they'd change, that love would be enough, that if you could just be better, maybe things would finally feel safe. And now you're here with truth in your hands and heartbreak in your chest, and it's okay to not know what to do with all of it. Sometimes it hits you sideways. A random scent, a memory, a moment of silence that suddenly feels too big. You might feel silly for missing them. You might hear voices in your head that say, how can you miss someone who hurt you? But that's the thing about emotional trauma. It doesn't leave in clean, organized steps. You can hate what happened and still long for the version of them who made you laugh. You can know they were toxic and still miss the comfort of routine. That duality doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. We live in a culture that rushes healing, that tells us to move on, to let it go, to bounce back like pain is just a phase to muscle through. But grief asks us to pause, to sit in the discomfort, to allow the sadness, the rage, the disbelief, the relief, all of it. There is no healing without grief because grief is the sacred space where we honor what was lost, even if what was lost wasn't good for us, even if the loss was necessary. It still matters. Sitting with the grief is not about wallowing, it's about witnessing. It's saying, yes, that hurt. Yes, I stayed too long. Yes, I thought it would be different. And I'm allowed to mourn that. It's about holding yourself gently when the waves come, not fixing, not judging, just breathing through it. Grief doesn't need to be solved, it needs to be felt. That's how it moves. That's how we move with it. You might feel pressure to be okay, especially from people who didn't see the full picture, people who say you're better off without them. And while that may be true, it can also feel like a dismissal. Better off doesn't mean unbroken. Leaving doesn't mean forgetting. You can be better off and still feel hollow. You can be proud of yourself and still cry in the shower. The coexistence of grief and growth is real, and you're allowed to feel both. There is wisdom in grief. It teaches us about what we need, what we'll never tolerate again, and how deeply we are capable of feeling. It reconnects us with parts of ourselves we had to bury to survive. It invites us back to our own heart with more compassion, more clarity, and more courage than we had before. But none of that happens if we bypass it. So don't rush your grief. Sit with it. Let it speak. Let it shape you. And when the heaviness lifts, even just a little, even just for a moment, notice that too. That's healing, not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace, even if it's fleeting. Grief is not a permanent home, but it is a necessary stop on the way back to yourself. And you are worth that journey. For many of us, safety used to mean keeping the peace. It meant silence instead of honesty. It meant smiling through discomfort, staying small so we wouldn't be punished for taking up space. In a toxic relationship, survival often required this kind of shape-shifting. We learned to predict moods, tiptoe around triggers, and hide parts of ourselves that might spark conflict. And over time, we forgot what real safety even feels like. So when we leave, the first step isn't always about finding love again. It's about relearning how to feel safe in our own skin. Real safety doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. It doesn't require you to be less of yourself. It doesn't punish vulnerability or weaponize your softness. Safety is the space where you can exhale, where your no is respected without punishment, where your tears aren't used against you, where your truth doesn't feel dangerous. And when we've been in environments where none of that was present, learning to redefine safety feels foreign, sometimes even suspicious, because we've been wired to confuse intensity with intimacy, control with care. Healing means understanding that the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Your nervous system has spent months or years in hypervigilance. That tension in your shoulders, that impulse to apologize for everything, that dread you feel when someone's voice shifts, that's not weakness, that's survival. Your body adapted to stay alive, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So when you feel like you should be over it by now, offer yourself grace. You're not broken, you're recalibrating. Redefining safety starts by listening to your body again. Not the fear-based part that expects the worst, but the deep wisdom inside that knows what peace feels like. Ask yourself, does this feel grounding, or does it feel like I'm bracing for something? That one question can change everything. It teaches you to trust your intuition again. It reminds you that you get to choose who enters your space. You get to decide what energy surrounds you. And more importantly, you get to walk away from anything that doesn't feel right. And this time, safety isn't about avoiding discomfort at all costs. It's about knowing you can handle it when it comes. It's knowing that you have your own back, that you don't need to abandon yourself to be loved, that you can hold space for hard conversations without losing your identity in them. This is where empowerment lives, not in perfection, but in presence, not in getting it right every time, but in staying true to yourself, even when it's hard. Sometimes we think healing will feel like fireworks, but more often it feels like small, quiet choices. Locking your door and breathing a little easier, saying no and not explaining yourself, letting the phone ring without rushing to answer, crying when you need to cry, laughing without looking over your shoulder. These tiny moments are where safety begins to rebuild itself, not as a defense mechanism, but as a lifestyle rooted in self-respect. And when you start to taste that safety, really taste it, you'll realize how much you were settling before. You'll feel it in your gut. This is what I've been missing. You'll notice how loud chaos used to be, how heavy it was to carry someone else's moods, how deeply you silenced your own needs just to maintain a fragile peace. But not anymore. You don't owe your peace to anyone who can't protect it with you. You don't owe your body, your energy, or your presence to anyone who makes you feel unsafe. So when you ask yourself what healing looks like, maybe it looks like this: feeling safe in your own home, in your own body, in your own choices. Maybe it looks like saying, I choose me this time, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, not to build walls, but to honor the sacredness of your inner world. Because the truth is, safety isn't just a feeling, it's a right, and it's yours to reclaim. Absolutely. Here's the final section of your speech: loving with boundaries, expanded into 8 heartfelt and powerful paragraphs. This part brings everything full circle. After the hurt, after reclaiming self-worth, after grieving and redefining safety, this is where we learn what love really means when it's grounded in truth, not fear. Loving with boundaries, speech, paragraphs. After everything you've been through, you may start to wonder, can I still love? Can I love again without losing myself? The answer is yes. But this time it's different. This time, love doesn't require your silence. It doesn't ask you to prove your worth or earn your place. This time, love comes with boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as bridges to protect the connection between you and yourself. That's what loving with boundaries means. Choosing love that includes you, not just the other person. For so many of us, boundaries were something we only thought about after they were crossed. We were taught to equate love with sacrifice, that true love meant giving without limits, staying no matter what, excusing patterns that made us feel unsafe just because the word love was spoken. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's enmeshment. It's overfunctioning. It's losing yourself in the name of connection. That's not love's fault. That's what happens when we haven't been taught the difference between attachment and affection. Boundaries are how we keep love healthy. They are acts of clarity, not cruelty. When we say, I need space to process, or I can't talk about this right now, we're not rejecting the other person, we're respecting ourselves. And when someone can't hold that space with us, when they push past our no, when they demand access we're not ready to give, that tells us everything we need to know. Healthy love honors boundaries. Toxic love punishes them. Loving with boundaries also means we no longer abandon ourselves just to avoid conflict. We don't smile when we're hurting. We don't say yes out of fear. We don't betray our inner voice to soothe someone else's ego. That's not grace. That's self-erasure. And we've done enough of that. Now we love from a place of fullness, from a place that says, I will show up for you, but I will not disappear for you. Because healthy love never asks you to go missing from your own life. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Forgiveness does not equal access. You can wish someone healing without inviting them back into your world. You can close a door with love in your heart. That's a boundary too. And it's often the most misunderstood one. People will say you've changed, and you have. You've grown. You've learned that love without limits is not sustainable, that peace is too precious to trade, even for history or nostalgia or old promises. There's also the fear, will boundaries make me unlovable? Will I lose people if I finally start saying no? Maybe. Some people loved your compliance, not your wholeness. But the right people, the ones who are also doing their own healing, they will meet you there. They won't be scared off by your limits. They will respect your no because they have one of their own. And that is where real intimacy begins, in mutual freedom, not obligation. You don't have to be harsh to be firm. You don't have to be closed off to be self-protective. Loving with boundaries is an art, and one that gets easier with time. You'll mess up, you'll overextend, and then realize it after. That's okay. You're learning. You're building new patterns in a nervous system that once equated love with fear. You are rewiring your sense of what connection means. And that takes time, tenderness, and repetition. So here you are at this place in your healing where love is no longer about proving your worth, but protecting it. Where boundaries are not the end of love, but the beginning of something deeper, truer, and safer. Love doesn't demand you lose yourself. It invites you to bring your whole self to the table. And this time you get to show up as all of you. No shrinking, no hiding, just love. With boundaries,